Welcome back to the Better by Nature podcast, where we're talking with folks who have inspiring stories of overcoming adversity by relying on natural remedies. Today I'm joined by Spencer Morey, husband to Courtney Morey, who we recently had on the podcast, and father to Annie and Wells. Spencer had no idea that his experience in the medical industry and with kinder frogs at TCU would be called upon in the way that it has been. He takes us through his side of Annie's miraculous story. Before we jump in, this episode is brought to you by Life Leaf Remedies. At Life Leaf Remedies, we're making natural remedies that help you feel better today. Replace those unnatural household remedies that we've leaned on for too long with superior natural remedies. Check us out today at lifeleafremedies.com. Now, I hope you'll enjoy this episode of the Better by Nature podcast and feel better today, y'all. I am joined today by somebody that I'm very, very excited to spend time with, have gotten to spend a lot of time with through the course of our lives growing up. Close friend of mine. We were in each other's weddings, and somebody who is on the other side of a podcast we just recently did with Courtney Morey. And so this is Spencer Morey. Welcome, sir. Welcome to the Better by Nature podcast, where we talk about overcoming adversity with natural remedies.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yes, sir.
It's good to be here.
I'm excited, man, because, listen, one, we got the story from Courtney, which was just incredible. But two, I lived this part of it with you more so than I did with Courtney, right? I mean,
Yeah.
You're the one that I was in contact with while you guys were going through all of this, and I've still got the screenshots of some of the text messages that you sent that just kind of shook my entire world, right? And I'm sure obviously shook your world too. But I mean, where should we begin? Where do you want to begin? Where does your part of the story begin here?
I would say that part of it comes from when I reached out to you specifically for help.
Yeah.
In my mind, it was when we were in the CICU with Annie. Courtney and I were both under extreme amounts of stress where we both were at a limit. And it was during COVID, so there was a lot of restrictions. So we couldn't be together
Right.
for that husband and wife support. And I initially reached out for Courtney.
Right.
Saying, hey, I think she could use some kind of support. I would prefer for it not to be pharmaceutical. Prefer for it to not to be an opioid or something that changes her personality or something like that. So I wanted to reach out to say, do you think CBD or something similar could help us with that anxiety and that stress? And you said, yeah, absolutely. You gave it to Courtney. Or you gave it to me and I gave it to Courtney. And then from there, I noticed that it had a pretty quick effect on her level of stress.
Yeah.
When I noticed that, I started to look at myself in the mirror a little bit too. I think that men typically are later to admit when we're struggling or when we need that support or help. And I started to notice it in myself that I was more irritable, that I was struggling with decision making, not sleeping well. And when I started seeing it work for her, I was like, all right, I'm going to give this a shot.
Well, and let's back up. All right. So, you're talking about being more irritable. You're talking about just sort of stress and anxiety in general. Your daughter's life was on the line, man. I mean, how, and that's to me what was most moving about all of this is that's one of the most extreme things that I can imagine in this world. Now that I'm a parent, and at the time I was too, right?
Yeah.
Had one daughter, now have two, and the text messages, and I guess again, kind of went through this with you, right? We knew Annie was coming, we knew that Down syndrome was part of it, and we knew that the heart issue was part of it. And I just remember getting a text message from you that she might not make it. And I was like, wait, I didn't know that was part of the deal here, man.
Neither did we.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of what we got from Courtney and her story as well. But I just remember thinking that, like, wait, I'm taken off. Like, are you taken back by this? Like, did this catch you off guard? Were you ready for this? Like, holy crap, man.
Yes.
And, to back up even further, that speaks to sort of the extremity of the situation. Before all this, you had never been into cannabis, right?
No.
We go back to middle school, right? And we were, we tried to follow the rules pretty well early on, both of us did. And, in college, start drinking and stuff. But even then, you never really even tried much with cannabis or anything like that. Never had those kind of curiosities. And even up until when I was working with Green Lotus, the previous brand that we were working on, even then you were like, hey, supportive, but y'all still didn't have much of an interest in the product.
Right.
And so for me, it was really neat to see y'all go from just sort of like, not for us, to, hey, our backs are against the wall. Can we give that a shot instead of something else? And that was so cool. I mean, if I could have gotten the products to you faster, I would have. I think I got there that night, though.
You got them very quickly. The only faster way would have been a helicopter.
Yeah.
So you did great.
Coming in hot.
The shipping is great.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think, that was something that to me really opened my eyes, because up until that point, I had only seen people who had embraced cannabis really be able to dip their toe into the waters with CBD products and some of these other things that can just be helpful without being recreational, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, with you, give a little bit of a background on kind of how life was, before Annie, and then, kind of what happened, as you guys learned about Annie. And then, you kind of said it leading into the circumstances. We're in a pandemic, it's sort of just this height of chaos.
Oh, it was a crazy year. It's still crazy, and we're 2 years out.
Yeah,
but
right.
Leading into Annie, we had our son Wells, and he's neurotypical and was a perfect child. He's super easy. He's just happy all the time, and he's always been a great kid. And we decided we wanted to try for a daughter, or just another child. And I wanted a daughter personally because I already got my boy. So I was like, hey, girls from here on out, fine by me.
Team girl dad over here. I'm 100% with you there.
Yeah, you with two girls. And so I wanted a daughter after that. And we found out in May, if I'm remembering right, Courtney will correct me. That's completely fine. In May, about the possibility of her diagnosis of Down syndrome. Initially, I would say there was a period of mourning for sure. I don't want to sit here and say that that Courtney and I are the strong people that got our diagnosis and we're gung ho and we're like, here we go,
cheering it on.
Yeah, and there's a period of time, I think, regardless of your exposure to Down syndrome or people with disabilities or just the nature of it, regardless of your exposure to it, if you were expecting what we thought was, oh, well, we're going to have another baby and that baby is going to be a copy paste of Wells.
Exactly.
We're like,
why
great.
wouldn't it be? Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be, if it's a girl, it'll be the girl version of Wells. If it's a boy, we'll have another Wells, just a little bit shorter until they grow up. And I think the mourning and the difficulty that happened for about 24 to 48 hours initially was that mourning of the loss of the idea. The idea of a typical family. Yeah. The idea of everything just being, for loss of a better word, easy.
Not chaotic.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah. Just you kind of had to accept it. And once you've accepted it and moved on from it, then you're okay. And so what we did was Courtney had less of an exposure to people with disabilities than I did.
Yeah.
So I was a PICAP at TCU, and our entire philanthropy was centered around people with special needs.
Right.
And Kinderfrogs, the school that our two kids will be going to starting next week, like this time next week, which I will get very emotional when I start talking about that.
It's a special day.
Yes, but our entire philanthropy volunteered there. Initially, it was required, but then it just became a thing.
Yeah.
That was just on our schedule. It's what we did. And we volunteered at Kinderfrogs. And for those that don't know, Kinderfrogs is a really specialized school for children with learning and developmental disabilities, but it's very focused on kids with Down syndrome.
Right.
They are on TCU's campus, and it is just they're entrenched with the TCU lifestyle, which is cool. Like, any student can volunteer at any time, which is what we did. So once I started to kind of show Courtney videos from like their YouTube and their website, and we started to learn more about Down syndrome, I think that's around the time that we started to embrace the idea. And then after that, that's when we found out about the heart issue.
Yeah.
I'm in medical device sales. I'm very exposed to health and surgery and cardiovascular surgeons and children's hospitals. So there's another step that I'm more comfortable with that Courtney just doesn't have exposure to.
Right.
So initially I would say that I was very, very comfortable, probably overly confident and comfortable, because I've seen many surgeries go extremely well.
Yeah.
And so I was like, hey, we're going to deal with the Down syndrome aspect of things, and she'll need surgery at some point, probably in her first year, and she'll come out of that surgery and be better. Maybe a little bit of overly optimistic.
What option do you have?
Right. You can either mourn it, or you can just... I'm typically a realist, but in that moment I was very optimistic.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of like a pilot that's had a lot of successful flights, right?
I've seen so many surgeries that just went great.
Somebody who, has only flown once or twice gets on a plane with some turbulence.
Right. Holds on tight.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Where you're like, it's fine. We know about this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that I think is a unique advantage that you guys went into this situation with.
And it was, and I also would say it was that much more of a shock for me when it didn't go well.
Yeah.
So even going into, we met with, so her surgery was on January 28th, and we met it was January 28th of 2021, and we met with the doctor the day before. Just to go over everything, make sure everything was all right, go over her labs and tests. And his name's Dr. Tam. He's an unbelievable surgeon. He's basically royalty at Cook Children's. Yeah. And he said she's going to have surgery, should come out and be in the ICU for about 7 days. And then after that, maybe in the step-down unit for about 3 to make sure she's doing well. And then she'll be home next Saturday. And we were like, great.
Sounds like a plan. Let's walk through it and
let's do
not have anything go wrong.
So, yeah. And so Courtney was still very, very scared, but I hear him say that, and I'm just like, let's do this.
Yeah.
He's going to do it right. And to his credit, like, the repair was perfect. Her heart repair was absolutely perfect. Her heart just didn't respond the way it was supposed to. So we go there that day. We're there we got there at around 6 a.m. She didn't actually start surgery until about 9 or 10 a.m. And I started to notice once we got to like 6 p.m., that's when things started. It's a long time. And you start to, I was really optimistic up until that point. I was like, hey, these things take time. We're talking about a microscopic surgery here, a really, really, really small heart.
Yeah. And
then at about 6 p.m., that's when I started to kind of feel that sense of dread. The people that were coming out every hour or so to check in with us, the nurses that were in the room and the circulators, started to have more of a worried look on their face.
Right.
And you start to see that, and you're like, oh no. And she ended up coming out around 11 p.m. if I'm remembering right. So it was at least a 12-hour surgery.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It was terrifying.
And at least 6 hours of torment, probably, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, like after a certain point, you're like, okay, now we're in territory we're not supposed to be in.
Yeah. When we were in that waiting area, initially there were several families in there, and then you start to notice you're the last family in there.
Mm-hmm.
Their kids have come out, everything went according to plan. And so that was the first time we learned about ECMO, which is when somebody came out and said, hey, there's a possibility her heart's not responding the way that it's supposed to. So for those that don't know, you've got a heart, right? And your right ventricle.
Some people have a heart.
Some do, that I've heard of. And some people, or everyone, sorry, my brain is not working. The right ventricle is what pushes non-oxygenated blood to the lungs. That blood goes to the lungs, it gets oxygenated, it comes back into the heart, then eventually it gets to the left ventricle, and that's what pumps oxygenated blood to the rest of the heart.
Gotcha.
So her right ventricle, what pushes that deoxygenated blood to the lungs, just wasn't firing, in the simplest of terms. And what they told us was she just needs rest, so she's going to go on ECMO, which they, in more or less terms, they didn't say, hey, by the way, ECMO is life support.
Yeah.
That's a scarier word.
Way scarier.
It's just way scarier, but it was kind of interesting because they said she might need to. We'll come back to you and let you know. They came back about an hour later and said, no, she won't need to. She's doing better now. It's responding. So, like, huge sigh of relief. Like, all the tension out of the shoulders. And so she came out of surgery. And that was the most... I'll remember that for the rest of my life. Like, there's a team of 15 people surrounding her table, or taking her to the cardiac ICU. People are holding things, oxygen tanks, different stuff, and it's just a scene. And they let us see her, and she was very, very swollen, just from all of the anesthesia and medication over the course of a 12-hour surgery. Yeah. It's just not good for anyone to be under that. And her chest was still wide open. So they showed it, and it was just jarring. Even to somebody who's been in surgery a lot, when it's your daughter, right. It changes everything.
Yeah.
And she went into that room, and essentially everything was fine. I mean, considering she was doing well, she was responding, and one of our sweetest nurses that we got to know extremely well. It's unfortunate that we had to get to know her extremely well because we were there for so long, but her name is Ginger, Ginger, and she's amazing. And she was sweet. She was like, hey, you've been here for 12 hours. Is there a place you can go? These lights are going to be on all night. We're going to be monitoring her. She's going to be asleep, but you guys aren't going to get any sleep. She's going to be fine. And at the time, that was the right advice.
Right.
The absolute correct advice. We just breathe, get away from the situation for a minute. And so we went to Courtney's sister's house, which is like 5 minutes away, and fell asleep somehow, mostly out of exhaustion. And
miraculously.
Yeah, like head hit the pillow and just out.
Yeah.
Well, then we got a call 45 minutes later from Cook Children's, saying, hey, get back here. And that, I'll always remember that phone call as well. There's a lot of things that, like, bad core memories.
Yeah, I can
things
imagine
that you just can't delete. Throw up. And I said, well, what's going on? They said, just get back here. And so we got in the car, we flew, probably ran a few red lights, and turns out her right ventricle was not responding again, and that's when she had to go on life support on ECMO. And for those that don't know, ECMO is essentially you have a gigantic machine that is probably the size of a golf cart in that room that is her heart.
Right.
It's taking all the function away from her heart, and the idea is to let her heart rest so that it doesn't have to do work. It can just rest while the machine does it.
Repair, hopefully.
Yes. It's something that's always been a God thing for me, that as smart as humans are, we need the heart that we've created is the size of a golf cart. And the heart that God created can fit in our bodies. And yeah, it's the size of your palm.
Yeah.
So
even in 2022.
Yeah.
Right? Like we think about, we've made advances over time.
It's the best
memory
technology
that
we
you
have.
can fit in your pocket now and all
Right.
that. But we're here in 2021 at that point.
At that time.
Yeah, the machine that has to run a heart and do the heart's job is the size of a golf cart.
Yeah, it's gigantic. And
that's wild.
Yeah, and so you walk back in that room. We walked back in the cardiac ICU, and we tried to get into the room where she was, but it was full of nurses and doctors. There's alarms going off, and somebody kind of whisked us away and said, "You don't need to be here."
Yeah.
Which I understand. But it turns out that her heart had stopped, and they did CPR on her. Her chest was still open, so they had to do compressions on her heart for 55 minutes.
55 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
doing CPR, essentially, for 55 minutes.
Yeah, to make sure that she lived. There was plenty of opportunities for seizure, for brain damage due to oxygen loss. She never had any of that, and it was a miracle. So they essentially whisked us into that, what Courtney and I pretty much call a closet. Put us in there and said, which it's the best option they had. I'm not trying to throw anybody under a bus here. That's where they put us, and it had chairs and a couch, but people kept coming in but not telling us anything, and we started to kind of more or less lose our minds. We were praying, we were extremely emotional, but everyone that came in would just say hey, just checking on y'all, and we would ask, hey, what's going on? And nobody would tell us
Why
anything.
are you checking on me if you don't have any
Yes, give me info.
Yeah.
And it finally got to the point where I think about the third time that somebody came in to check on us, I pretty much deep down guttural said, is Annie alive? Because we didn't know. The look on their faces, the read I was getting from people, and they couldn't give me an answer. And they said, give me a few minutes, I'll be right back. And I was like,
wrong answer.
I want a yes. Just give me a yes.
That is not the answer you want to hear.
Yeah, so when that door closed, that's when just every emotion you've ever felt comes out.
Yeah.
Courtney and I were wrecks of human beings. And then an intensivist came out. So an intensivist is essentially the doctors in the CICU that run everything. So you have amazing nurses, you have ECMO team, but they're the doctors after the surgeons. So the surgeon has done their job. Now you have an intensivist that is just, I don't know how they do their job. Just full disclosure. I don't know how.
Sounds like being an Army general almost.
Yeah. And he came in, and he was the one that met with us before the surgery. Said, I'm going to be at the CICU tonight, so we'll be managing everything. And that's when he told us about everything that had happened, and finally gave us the news that she was alive but on life support.
Yeah.
So that was a day. There's no other way to put it. A day.
And there were about 40 of those until you got
55.
55, that's right.
Yeah, no, you're fine. So
who's counting?
Yeah, who's counting? We ended up being in there for essentially 2 months.
My gosh. That is, the combination of things is just, it sounds so hard to survive. You find
a place I don't know any other way to put it. You find there's some kind of will to live, like when you see your daughter on the table with her chest open and all those tubes in her and a golf cart keeping her alive, the size of a golf cart keeping her alive, you kind of just put yourself to the side.
Yeah.
And not kind of, you put all of your needs, all of your worries, complaints, everything to the side, and you just say, I am here to be with you, and I'm going to support you 100% because you can't do anything for yourself right now.
Yeah.
One of the things that the nurses kept telling us to do, I mean, she was on so much medication. It was to the point that when she was ready to leave the CICU, one of the things that we really had, and when I say leave the CICU, I mean going from intensive care back to what they call step down. So it's still a unit, but you don't have the level of support. Like ECMO doesn't go down there. They basically said, read to her, let her know that you're there, hold her hand. But we couldn't climb into bed with her. We couldn't do anything because of the risk of everything that was connected to her heart.
I can just imagine the feeling of wanting to hug your baby.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to hug you and tell you it's going to be okay.
Right.
And you can't.
No. The only thing I could pretty much do, that Courtney and I could pretty much do, is hold her hand.
Yeah.
And like touch her face and stuff, but it was jarring.
Yeah. Gosh, that just guts me, and I hadn't gone through it, but yeah, even when your kids are sick, right? Just like regular flu or something, you just want to yank it out of them.
Oh yeah, you want to take it and say, I can handle this. So just give it to me.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, that's the cards that they've been dealt and that you've been dealt, and you've just got to be there.
So one thing that has been a theme with, the conversations we've had on this podcast, and just, I think probably the nature of what we're talking about in general, right, is just overcoming some of these extreme adversities. You get into these moments where the way I frame it is, how do you take a step forward? And you described it like, almost all of the things that usually you concern yourself with fall and just melt away, and you're almost like trying to will your child to be better with 100% of your capacity.
Yeah.
But eventually you got to eat, right? Eventually your body says, okay, if you're not going to sleep, I'm just going to conk out, right? Or you're going to learn how to sleep while you walk, is what the Navy SEALs do, right?
Right.
So how did you, beyond just that moment, how did you continue to take a step forward? Because there was multiple moments, if I recall, where it's just like, I was already on the ropes. Let me get up.
Yeah, there was, for the first week or so that she was on ECMO, that was just no breaks, no anything. Even though COVID was happening, because most of the hospital has, and all hospitals at that time had, a one-parent rule. Oh, yeah. But when your child is on life support, they allow you to break that rule, so Courtney and I could be together.
Well, that's great.
Right. And
at least you got that, yeah.
COVID times are weird.
Yeah.
But at least we were able to be together, which was great. We were able to support each other just in the sense of, hey, hun, I'll go get coffee. I'll go get something from this, like, bless the Lord, their Cook Children's has a Starbucks and a Chick-fil-A there.
Oh man!
So
the two things that just hit the soul, right?
Yeah,
all right,
the
we'll
things
be okay.
you really need at that moment. But
hey, wait. Was the Chick-fil-A open on Sunday?
I didn't know what day it was for 55 days, so I have no idea. Maybe. So if you're ever give it a shot. But you find little ways to be a husband, to support your wife in that moment, whether it's going to fill up her water, or just holding her and praying and talking about, and just showing her something funny, just finding a video like a TikTok or an old funny YouTube video that you always love to watch, or for us it was like John Mulaney. We would put on his
Classic.
like stand up or something, and it gives you a little bit, just the smallest sliver of normalcy and an escape. And so we would do that. Like you said, every once in a while your body just shuts down and you go to sleep.
You don't have a choice.
Courtney, unfortunately for her, I'm able to disconnect a little bit more easily than she is. So like I work, and so I had my computer as a way to, like, at 2 a.m, if I couldn't sleep, I'd just crack open my computer and answer some emails. And some people would think, oh, you're a psycho.
You're crazy.
You're a workaholic.
Yeah.
Whatever. It was a disconnect. It was a way for me to just, for an hour, try to not think about the beeping machine on the other side of the room. The other thing that people don't tell you in the CICU, alarms go off constantly. And some of them are serious. Some of them are because a sensor just moved.
Right.
And it's like, we're not picking up anything, so we're going to scream at you at 3 a.m. So you have no rest. Like, you're constantly being woken up by those alarms. So if I was woken up and couldn't go back to sleep, some of my customers were probably like, why is he emailing me at 3 a.m.? But it was just a way for me to disconnect. Courtney didn't really have that. Right. I noticed it. That helped me, but I noticed it wearing on her too. She didn't really have an outlet,
right?
I would say.
Yeah, because I mean, and we talked with her about it a little bit. I mean, her outlet was almost social media, not in a bad way, right? I mean, that's part of the story of the advocacy that she has started, and it made a lot of sense. She's like, well, it's just an overwhelming amount of information.
Yeah.
What are you supposed to do? Have a bunch of phone calls and,
right.
I mean, you'll never pull that off, right? I mean,
no,
even if you have a small family,
just trying to update everybody.
Yeah, trying to update everybody is an impossible task at that point, because just change after change, and just at every turn was tons of information. It felt like. So, and she did, and not to go too far into that because we did talk about it, but I mean, from there, she kind of emerged into this advocate and is still on a roll.
Oh, it's growing every day.
Yeah.
Her level of advocacy, and it's so funny because I am fervently against social media. Like, I don't do anything. I used to be on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then I started to notice like how much time it was taking out of my day, just mindlessly scrolling. And so one day I just shut it all down, and I felt great afterwards.
Talk about a natural remedy.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Whew. All right. And so I did all I could to convince Courtney to do the same. And it was like, leading up to the surgery, I was talking to her. I was like, you just need to, I would like for you to see the relief that I felt and all of that. And I mean, to her credit, she was stubborn about it and was like, no, I mean, this is a good way to, it's like, fine, do what you need to do. Well, she proved me wrong.
Yeah, it's a good thing she didn't listen to you.
Good thing, right? And because she found that level of support through thousands of people. Some people we knew, many people that we don't. And still, people from international support, from all over the world. People were sending messages. I'm praying for Annie. The big ones for me, because she would show them to me, is like, over the course of it, like, Courtney is I'm a terrible storyteller. Courtney is an amazing, I can tell a story, but I can't type a story. She can type a story. Like, she can give an update and really draw somebody in with, and kind of bring them into the room and like make them feel emotions. Like, I'm very cut and dry, and I'll be like, today we did this, bullet points. And it's not, nobody would want to read that on Instagram posts. But Courtney can.
Yeah.
And so she would bring somebody in just from her writing and the amazing videos and pictures she would take to inform people about how Annie was doing. And some of the messages we got, they gripped my soul. Like there was one that I'll always remember where somebody said, "Hey, I consider myself an atheist. I haven't been to church in a decade. And I, without even really thinking, walked into a church today and prayed for Annie." And there was so many like that. And that kind of thing, I'm like, oh,
that's why
God's using Annie.
Yeah.
God's using Annie for other people's salvation. And like that was beautiful to me. So that kind of stuff, like, that doesn't happen unless Courtney's doing what she's doing.
Absolutely.
I mean, through word of mouth, sure, there's ways for it to get out, but we might not have ever heard about it.
Yeah.
But it really put into perspective her situation and how so many people were praying and thinking about Annie. And that was unbelievable to see.
Yeah. No, and I remember talking to Courtney about that as well. As you know, we're all strong in our faith, and to think about the work that Annie is doing, that a lot of pastors are out there trying to do, is one of those that just sort of, if you're a believer, and even for apparently a lot of people who aren't, it makes you step back and go, oh,
yeah.
Maybe I need to think about this a little bit.
Right. My dad had a great line when he was talking to me at some point during this process. I believe it was after she had come home, and he was more comfortable saying this, but he basically said, do you realize that you and Courtney could have both gone to seminary and not brought as many people to the Lord as Annie has in the last 2 months?
That's wild, man.
And I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right.
That is so wild.
Because there's so many, like, it put it in perspective. I was like, yeah, the Lord is using Annie's story as a way for people to grow closer to Christ.
Yeah.
And even if they were atheists and now they kind of think about praying, that's a beautiful thing.
It's a huge step.
Yeah.
Huge step.
So that was cool.
It's something that maybe not everybody can appreciate, but it is. It's a massive thing to do that, and you're changing someone's life in a way that just isn't possible in another way.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we talk about a lot right on this podcast is, you know, natural remedies over some of these other things that are out there, like prescriptions, like you talked about.
Right.
And things that people look to because they are supposed to be solutions.
Right.
But oftentimes they're not solutions. They're you know, they're part of the problem. And so, yeah, it's wild, you know, to think about the ability for someone to just hear a story about this little girl and make a change in their life that makes them happier from day to day.
Mm.
A real one, right? This isn't a happy pill they're taking.
Right.
Right? It's just, I mean, somebody going from atheism to just saying a prayer, that's huge.
Yeah.
And you and I know that can make you feel better.
Yeah.
Right.
No, absolutely.
The person who went from being the atheist to just saying a prayer, I guarantee they feel better after they've prayed, you know, versus before when they were skeptical. And try it, right? It's, you know, you can, you're full of it, whatever, BS. That's fine. Try it.
Right.
Call me on it, right? Try it. You know, burden of proof's on you, but
read some miracle stories and
try not to be moved. I mean,
yeah.
I guess that's the way that I look at it.
One of the things that that's probably in some of your screenshots from my text messages was Annie needs a miracle.
You told me one time to go outside, get on your knees and pray. What does it take for a friend to ask another friend to do that?
Tragedy. Like just utter. Like, I think that we as a people have, even if somebody is agnostic or atheist or is not a believer, there's a sense of something out there. And if you've never been through something horrible, you might not have felt it. But in that moment, you've got to just, if you're living it with somebody, if you've got a best friend who you want to support, you've just got to say, hey, I need you to pray. This is the most serious thing that's ever happened in my life. I need a miracle right now. And the only way to get that miracle, in my mind, there's nothing else that I can do. There's nothing else that Courtney can do. This isn't like fixing something around the house. This is something that's out of your hands and it's in God's hands. My joke, it's not a joke, but my line that I kept saying throughout the process was that Annie somehow had an express lane to the right hand of the Father during all of this. Like, somehow a prayer that had Annie's name to it, in my mind, I had to tell myself this to feel better, I think, but in my mind was getting there for sure. Like, I know that they all do, but I felt like that one just had like a high importance mark to it. And there was an outpouring of love, and we saw it and we felt it. And
go back to that just a little bit, because you work in a profession where I think the word you used was control, right? And that's not to say anything negative about the medical industry. I think that they've achieved a lot of things that, give the general population and also folks in the medical industry a confidence that they have a lot of control over a lot of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And you, like you mentioned, you've seen operations. This is the industry you've been in your entire career now.
Yeah.
And so when you get to that point, and this was the part that took me back too. I remember where I was standing when I was reading your text message, just sort of like, wait, what? It gets to that point where it's like, no, there's literally nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
It's like she's on this machine now, the golf cart.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the way that you explained it was, she's on this for a period of time, but after that, the situation doesn't improve the longer she's on it. There's
right.
a window. And if things didn't get to where they need to be in that window, that's it. That's all we got.
Yeah, you unplugged.
Played all the cards.
Yeah. I didn't think, because during that time I had to switch my normal perspective to optimist. And finally I pulled one of the intensivists to the side, and said, hey, if this doesn't work, what are our options?
Yeah.
Because they'll say things, but they're all trying to protect the parents a little bit.
Yeah.
They're not just going to come in there and say, for more or less better words, hey, if this doesn't work, Annie's not going to be here anymore. Nobody's going to say that to you. Thank God. But
yeah, they really don't need to.
But being the optimist I was at that time, I was thinking of options. I was saying, okay, well, what about a transplant? Just a straight up heart transplant. If her heart's not firing, let's get her a transplant. And so this intensivist was walking by the room, and I pulled him to the side and I said, hey, let's go somewhere and talk if you can. I need to know what my options are. I need to prepare mentally for what my options are, and I need to help prepare my wife for what the options are. Can you shoot me straight for a little while and not worry about my emotions? I was like, I'll hold those in. I'll deal with those later, but talk to me. And
I need answers.
He said, yeah, walk with me. And so we went to a room that wasn't being used, and he closed the door, and I could tell by his demeanor that this wasn't going to be a fun chat.
Yeah.
So I straight up just asked, like, so if ECMO, if this life support doesn't work, if the rest that Annie's getting hasn't helped, they kind of give you a timeline to where 14 days is usually about the max of how long it's safe for somebody to be on ECMO.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for that is because clotting is a really, really big risk, to where a clot can pass through those tubes and hit her heart, and don't need to talk about what happens then. But after 14 days, for some reason, it just becomes a higher risk, and the longer they're on it, the risk gets higher and higher. So it doesn't really, more support doesn't help.
Right.
Which is interesting. Like, my brain doesn't work that way.
How most of us think, right?
Yeah,
like, no, just more
support, more rest. Like, that's the way my brain went.
Yeah.
So I asked him that first and said, okay, well, once we get past, everyone keeps saying like 14 days or 2 weeks or 10 days, like in that time frame. And he was like, that's when he described the clotting and the dangers after. I said, okay, how about a heart transplant? Like, what are my options here as a father? And his wife is one of the heads of the transplant team at Children's Dallas. And so he knows.
Yeah,
like,
you got a good expert there.
Yeah, those two are like powercouple.com.
Wow.
Like, they're beasts. And I don't know how they do it. And he said, honestly, to be frank with you, because you asked me to be frank, odds are that because she has pulmonary hypertension, I haven't mentioned that, but I'm sure Courtney did. The pulmonary hypertension is a contraindication, which, for those that don't know, that just pretty much means a red flag or a con against a heart transplant. And Down syndrome is another one that they, I could get into that, but that's more of just the idea of, should we give a heart transplant to somebody who might not be an extremely productive member of society versus somebody,
That's the question?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my question was going to be, is there a difference in the heart of somebody who has Down syndrome versus not?
No, it was more of a deserving.
Oh my
thing.
gosh!
And so that's a whole nother thing.
Oh boy!
And he understood
talk about
that.
A way to
the
light
way
a fire or a dad on fire. My goodness!
Yeah, I didn't really tell Courtney that part.
Yeah,
but
hey, Courtney, plug your ears. Good Lord!
The delivery, like, I could tell, it's not like he just like dropped that, and he's a very amazing person. He said it in a very friendly way, but
Delicate
I got the
way,
message.
Yeah.
So it was in that meeting or fireside chat where we pulled to the side, and he kind of threw my optimism into realism. And basically, there was a test coming up in 24 hours where what they do is, once the patient is at a point where they feel comfortable testing the heart, I don't know what their parameters are, but they come in with clamps and they clamp the tubes that are going to her heart and see if her heart can do it. So it's kind of a shock to the system. It's been resting for however long, and then they clamp and they see if the heart can do it on its own. And so that was coming up in a day or so, 24 to 48 hours from that conversation. And I got to a really dark place.
Yeah.
After that conversation, because I had been banking on, this doesn't work, there's a plan B. If that doesn't work, there's a plan C. And that's when I found out there was plan A, and that was it. So that was difficult. There's no other word to describe it. That was the hardest period of time in my life, the darkest period of time in my life. And that's when I felt completely helpless, saying, go outside and get on your knees and pray, because that's all I could do.
Yeah. I mean, that's, again, that point in time and the set of circumstances, there's plenty of people that, mock religion or faith, those can be different things too. But when you are in that place and that is your only option, I've got to imagine even to the strongest non-believer, which the funny joke is that takes a lot of faith too.
Right.
It's just it's gotta make you think a little bit more about what's really in control here. Who is really in control here? This little girl, by all means, and you even made the comment there about how society views these things. It's very real, like it or not. That little girl was not only given the opportunity to flip the proverbial middle finger to that notion,
Right.
but done so in a way that has changed literally thousands of lives. How do you call that happenstance or
Right.
coincidence or it's just nature bouncing around each other? I mean, again, I think if that after all of that, your take is still to not believe, that takes an incredible amount of faith. So you're just sort of proving the inverse.
It's faith in a different way.
Yeah.
And, it's a very, that dark place comes from me mentally and prayerfully fighting with God and pleading and begging and probably in a very immature way, just trying to make deals with God to say, if you do this, which that's not,
it's not how it works. But
even in the moment, I was like, I know this isn't how it works, God.
This is what I got.
This is what I got. Like,
I'll give you all my vices. Take
what
them.
do you
Get
need?
them away from me.
Take them. Yeah. And so what do you need me to do? How can I make sure that my 4-month-old daughter lives? And you just do everything you can mentally and prayerfully to try to, in your mind, because once you are at that point of just absolute, you have nothing, you have to just try to will it to happen through prayer, and just through love and holding her as much as you can, whether it's just through touch, just like holding her hand and tickling her legs and her face and just letting her know that you're there. Because at this point, like, she's barely opening her eyes. She's not responsive. It was a very jarring scene to see a little 4-month-old baby laying on the table there, just with all these tubes and everything. So you just pray and you love them as much as you can in that moment. Yeah.
No, that perfectly said.
Thank
I
you.
mean, I can only imagine, again, as a dad, that's exactly how I would respond is you just don't have any other option. You just got to put your energy into that kid and hope that it's enough. And if it's not, then you have to hope that there's a good reason for that. But in this case, that's not what happened.
Yeah,
right?
She did it.
Yeah, she did it. She did it. Y'all got to go home, got to have the celebration and all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're a while in here. I don't know if we even, if we want to break this into a second episode or keep going. But I mean, for y'all, life has been different since then.
Mm-hmm.
And it continues to change every day at this point, right? I mean, Annie is still very much writing her story. So, I mean, what's it been like since then?
The first, so she came home. She went into surgery in late January of 2021, and she came home March 24th. And the first April, May, June, July, August, I would say 8 months after was, I mean, it's still hard, but the first 8 months after, like the rest of 2021, was extremely difficult. Because what you're dealing with when you go home from something like that is we had to teach Annie how to eat again, because for the longest time she was on a feeding tube, so she couldn't eat from a bottle. So she just completely forgot how to eat from a bottle and had to teach her that again, but she had a tube going into her nose, and that tube made it uncomfortable for her to eat and swallow, so she hated it. Absolutely hated it. The only time that she would eat from a bottle was if she was asleep. So at that age, they're eating from a bottle 6 times a day. So I would just Courtney and I would go into her room, get her to sleep, hold her for a while in a dark room, and then give her a bottle because otherwise she'd get dehydrated.
Yeah.
So she had that. Courtney will know this number better than me, but I think she came home on like 15 or 16 medications that were around the clock.
Oh, my God.
And she couldn't take, at that time, anything by mouth. For some reason, if we did like a syringe and put it into her mouth, she'd either spit it out or would throw it up pretty quickly. And so then you're like, well, did she get any of that?
Yeah.
And she needs that. That's why it's prescribed to her.
That's
So
the
like,
point.
what did she get? And so for that long period of time, we were having to put those medications into her bottle. So we'd have to get her to sleep, give her a bottle, and there was an extreme amount of pressure to have her finish that bottle because then she'd get all the medications. Well, then sometimes she would spit up like 15 minutes later, and you're like, well, what did she absorb? And so it's
not like you're just going to scoop that back up.
Yeah,
like,
right?
All
Like
take that back.
It's gone. And so not only was giving it to her stressful, the schedule was just... One of Courtney's friends, who's a pharmacist, she came over and was like, here's how you do it. Let me break down your schedule. Like, we had spreadsheets to be able to know with, like, it was color-coded and, like, to know the time and the place and what we were giving. The syringes were all color-coded so that we could just be like, she needs blue, purple, and yellow at this hour, and she can only have this one 30 minutes after eating, so it has to be this. It was extremely stressful, not to mention... when you come home, there's an unbelievable amount of appointments to have to go to because all the cardiologists, the ENT, everybody has to see her to make sure she's doing well after such an extremely traumatic event. So there were some times where she'd have like 5 to 10 appointments in a week. Well, Courtney can't do all that.
Oh, man.
And so like Courtney and I are doing it together. Well, we have a 3-year-old at the time.
Yeah.
So
Wells is still hanging out.
Is still hanging out, but COVID, so he can't come to the appointments.
Oh,
so
man.
you've just gotta. It was the rest of that year was coffee and CBD driven. Like there was no other way to get around it. And for me too, whiskey. Like when I got home, like if it was a day, you have a glass to take the edge off before bed because you needed things, and CBD was one of those things where Courtney and I had a little system where it got to a point where we would notice if one of us hadn't taken it that day.
Yeah.
Which is funny. Like you wouldn't think that it would have that kind of... Some people would probably think that like CBD or any kind of medication is a certain percentage placebo effect.
Sure.
Where your brain just tells you, I took this, now I'm fine.
Yeah.
Like,
sure.
But we would, if one of us was acting a little bit more stressed and a little bit more irritable, nice way to put it. Well done.
Hey, I live it too, man.
Very well done. Then the other, we would very comfortably say, have you taken your CBD today? And most of the time it was no. Sometimes it was yes. Then you're like, okay, bye.
Yep.
Sorry, I just had to check. And
that was the wrong question.
Yeah. And so what I've kind of told people about CBD and me taking it, they're like, well, what do you get from it? Mm-hmm. And I'm the type of person that I can get angry quickly, or I can get to that point a little bit faster than some people, or if like the anxiety and stress is really building up, once I get to that point, it's hard to like pull away from it.
Right.
So like the nicest way I can put it is like if Courtney bought furniture from IKEA, if I'm 30 minutes in,
or Home Goods,
probably at that point. I've probably hit that level. But there's something about when I'm on CBD that it extends that line. It extends the point in which, so I call it blue to red.
Yeah.
So if I'm blue, it makes that blue section a lot larger to where I can handle more stress and more anxiety, and not anxiety, but more stress and difficult things can come in
Right.
without me succumbing to that anxiety or stress or whatever it may be. And I've noticed that, and I've continued to take it ever since.
Yeah.
I thought when we initially reached out to you that Courtney and I were just going to use it while Annie was in the CICU.
Just something.
And then, just to get us by.
Yeah.
And then we got home and we realized it was just as stressful, which sounds crazy to some people. Like your daughter's on the bed in the CICU, but when we got home, like,
well, now it's on you.
yeah, the CICU has nurses and intensivists everywhere.
Something goes
to help
off.
you.
There's people who know they're going to take
They
care
know
of
what
it.
they're doing,
Yeah.
right? But the alarms still go off when you go home,
Yeah.
and you've got to be able to manage it. So I would say it got more stressful when we got home, which was not expected.
Yeah.
Like, you think you're going home, everything's going to be better. Well, now you have this crazy schedule, and you're going to all these appointments, and those appointments aren't full of good news.
Of course.
They're not like, she's doing great, see you later. They're like,
Right.
no, this or that, and you always have to do something different, or maybe we adjust the medication. And so I would say that taking CBD during that time, and still to this day, because it's still stressful.
Oh, yeah.
Annie's doing, just so everybody knows, Annie's doing unbelievably. She's the funniest, happiest little girl I've ever met. She has no idea what happened.
No.
Which, good for her.
No.
And she is so strong, and her speech is unbelievable. She's doing sign language. She starts school in a week, and so she's kicking butt. But Courtney and I, there's still stress there. We're very much looking forward to school starting.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, the story's still being written, right? I mean, I think we're going to have y'all just come back on the podcast.
Fine.
Fine. Twist your arm.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and obviously, like we mentioned, Courtney's journey since then has been pretty wild, and, she has done some things, just even as an observer, I'm like, man, I'm a cheerleader, like, as far as what she's doing, because she's doing a lot of things that most moms don't have the energy to do. Don't even bring courage into it, because I'm sure that's part of it too, but just energy, man. Like,
I don't know where she gets it.
When y'all have your backs against the wall, and you're at an advantage because a lot of the lingo that's being thrown at you are familiar with, right? So you're not, kind of in this, classroom setting, right? Where it's like, all right, sit down, let's learn some things here.
Right.
But Courtney was, right? Like, she was learning all this stuff on the fly, and, nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, most people don't go through school just thrilled about it, right? Like, just thrilled about having something to learn today. Right. I think as we get older, we enjoy learning stuff, but certainly not in that way.
Yeah.
So having your, just again, the most stressful, anxiety-filled circumstances that I can imagine, at least, I'm sure there's a lot of things that get you there, but, kind of take you to that peak of even red, what you were talking about, the blue to red. How is it she's able to have the wherewithal to sit down, learn all this stuff? All right, now that I got it, I'm going to throw it back at you. Yeah. And I'm going to dictate the terms of this conversation now.
Yeah, she's the exact right mom that Annie needs.
No doubt.
Which is really cool to watch. There's no other way to put it. It's really cool to watch. I'm non-confrontational.
Yeah.
She's confrontational. The only way to put it. So if something gets under her skin,
let's lean into it.
They're gonna hear it. And so she'll push back. She doesn't care who you are. And that's what Annie needs.
Yeah.
I'm there to be fun and happy and love her to death and make her laugh. Courtney is there to clear a runway for her to have just the best life possible.
All the
and
possibilities.
the best way that Courtney does that, in my opinion, is just through her advocacy, because the world, fortunately for Annie and fortunately for babies born with Down syndrome around this time in life, over the last decade, I would say, and it's probably from social media, like I keep saying I'm against it, but here we are.
There's some good that comes out of it.
There's some good, and a lot of good. If anyone goes to Courtney's page, there's a lot of good there.
A lot of good, yeah.
But the world has opened its eyes to people with disabilities and Down syndrome much more than when we were in high school, much more than the early 2000s, 90s, and then way before that. And that's a beautiful thing to see, but people still have a lot to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best way to learn is through exposure. Like in school, you talk about learning. I never learned anything by reading a textbook. I learned by doing and trying. Like that's why I liked physics, because you would learn it and then they would do the thing. Like they'd shoot a cannon. You go, oh, okay, now I can see what you're talking about.
See the art,
Yeah, there it goes. All right, yeah. But I think that when people go to Courtney's page, it's a way for them in their, regardless of their comfort level with somebody with disabilities, it's a way for them to normalize. It's not a word that's really thrown around, that's liked in the Down syndrome community, but it ups the comfort level with Down syndrome. Because people see Annie and you go, oh, she's just a kid.
Yeah.
She's a happy baby.
Yeah.
She's been through, more or less words, she's been through hell, but she's just a happy baby. And if you ever hear somebody that's an older person, an adult with Down syndrome, most of the time, if you just ask them and are comfortable saying, hey, what does Down syndrome mean to you? Mm-hmm. Like, what is it? And most of the time they'll tell you, oh, it just means it takes me a little bit longer to learn things.
Yeah.
Sometimes I pick it up real quick, but other times it takes a few more tries. Well, in my mind, why do we judge that? We don't do that to
normal,
people,
right? Yeah, I mean, I take a while to learn certain things.
I do too.
Like know?
We don't do that to people with dyslexia. We don't do that to people. There's not a stigma about people that are ADD. It's just, oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
But there's something about the Down syndrome side of things where I think we're learning. Everybody has a lot more to learn, and what Courtney's doing, in my mind, is really helping, at least for the people that follow her, is really helping people get more comfortable with the idea of it, and that they're just like anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing.
Well, I think the unknown is intimidating, and you know, to wrap it back to when you guys first learned about Annie, you know, you mentioned that you had that moment of, you know, kind of fear, and I think it's intimidation. It's like, gosh, we had this vision of what life would be like for this kid, and now we know it'll be different. We don't necessarily know how, but it turns out the biggest difference, I mean, I guess the heart issue is related to Down syndrome. Is that correct?
Yes. Not many people have the defect that Annie had, but when you have Down syndrome, you have a 50% chance of having some form of a heart defect.
Okay.
And of those, I believe Courtney knows the numbers better than me, but I think 25% of them require some form of surgery.
Right.
25 of those 50%. So you have a much higher odds of needing open heart surgery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. And that's where I looked at this whole situation like, man, the biggest thing y'all have gone through, I mean, it's related to Down syndrome, but it's not Down syndrome. It's a heart problem, you know? And you know, so it's just, again, as an observer, it's incredibly, I don't want to even use the word inspiring, because I feel like that's sort of too cheesy for the situation. Just got to go in one ear and out the other. It is so cool to watch her.
Yeah.
Like, just as a person, like, and I, you know, I've gotten to see what she's gone through, and like, today when we came in and she's in here, crawling around and playing with stuff, she really is just like just a baby,
She's just a kid. Yeah.
I don't
Having
see
fun.
a whole lot of difference between her and my girls crawling around,
Right.
and I do remember when, we were growing up, things certainly were different. We weren't quite as sensitive to anything back then.
Yeah. Which I think everybody wasn't.
Threw a lot of words around that you can't throw around these days. But,
Yeah.
Again, I think it all comes back to a level of unknown, and that leads to intimidation. We had somebody at our school that was, kind of not necessarily famous, but, Todd, everybody knew who he was. And if there's anything that stands out about that guy that I recognized as a young person in a much less sensitive time, was how much energy that guy had.
Yeah.
He was so
Positive
enthusiastic
energy.
about he's like a human version of a golden retriever.
Yeah.
in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Just so happy about everything. The guy didn't even know when people were picking on him.
Yeah.
I don't think he got picked on. I think most people love Todd, but
If he got picked on, most of the time somebody else stood up for him.
right.
Which is beautiful.
Right.
That's the way it should be.
But he was too busy having a good time to even realize if he was being picked on.
Yeah, or even
care.
cared.
Yeah.
And the thing that I've always, not that I've always, but when we got our diagnosis for Annie, I can't remember if it was all, it's been a lot since then, but it was either told to me or I read it. And I love this line. And it's that people that are born with Down syndrome, it was in a documentary. I remember it now. There it is. Ding, ding, ding. Is that people with Down syndrome are predisposed to joy. And why would we have a negative perception of that?
In
and
any
it's
way,
a
shape, or
thing.
form.
Yeah, Annie
we should
is
idolize. Well, I shouldn't idolize anything, but I mean, we should really envy that.
Oh, we should absolutely try to model it.
Yeah.
And Annie has taught me more about life than I could have ever taught anybody.
Yeah.
And she's going to be 2 in a month. So, her
getting
level
started.
of joy, I wake her up in the morning and all I hear is dad, and she's hugging me and she's so happy that I'm there. And I put her down in her high chair and she's clapping. And she loves to eat more than I do. It's very impressive. I love to eat, but she's different level. And so she, in every aspect of her life, she is exactly that idea of predisposed to joy.
Yeah.
And is just, and I look forward to watching her grow up to see what that evolves into. I think the best thing I've seen is the relationship with her and her brother, because he's worn off on her and she's worn off on him in a good way for both of them. And he's unbelievably joyful, and it's the greatest thing. This is a dad moment, but we've got a camera on Annie's crib because we need to monitor and everything to keep an eye on her. And we'll hear when she wakes up in the morning, and we'll be about to get up, and Courtney and I will be tired, and we'll be, another day, here we go.
I know the feeling, yeah.
Right? Even though you got your 8 hours, you feel like it was 2 hours. And right before we're about to get up, every once in a while, we'll hear him in the crib with her.
Oh, man.
And so he'll get out of his room, and before coming to check on mom and dad and say, hey, I'm awake, give me cereal, he'll hear his sister crying and climb into her crib and play with her for an hour. And they'll just be in there having a blast. So it's one reason why I was so happy that we had a boy first, and that he's going to be the older brother. He's going to be her protector, and that was my hope. And we're seeing it come to fruition every day. And he's just 4, and she's just under the age of 2, but we're watching him protect her. We're watching him be worried about her and help her stand up and help her crawl and love her to death. And just watching that is absolutely beautiful.
Well, and it's got to be such a relief, because in that circumstance, Wells got every reason to rebel in some sense, right? I mean, he's not getting the attention that a kid that age is going to be just thirsty for, right?
Yeah.
And, you see your sister, your sibling, this other kid who's taking all the attention away from you. I mean, kids aren't cerebral enough to know that, what's going on in a lot of cases and fully appreciate the magnitude of something like that. But, I mean, again, observer, getting to watch him not only on the videos that Courtney posts, but again, he's just walking in here today. I mean, they have a bond that is surprising, if I can say that, for a almost 4-year-old boy.
Yeah,
Right?
Annie loves Wells. Courtney and I's joke is that, and it's probably true, but Annie loves Wells more than Courtney or I, because he's more on her level.
Yeah.
I think there's an understanding there between brother and sister where they're just like, when we walk in a room, Annie lights up because we've talked about predisposed to joy. But when he walks in a room, there's a different level of light up. Like there's
that's my friend right
like,
there.
Yeah. Like N64 star power. Like she almost like jumps out of the crib to get to him. And watching them two just interact and play, and he's never like, when I'm like, hey, would you mind going to play with your sister? He's never the kid that's like, oh, he's like, yeah, okay. And we pause Bluey or the TV or whatever, and he will just immediately go play with her and not complain for a second. And that's a beautiful thing to watch.
That's so cool, man.
And like you said, he could have, I mean, for 2 months, he was, because after, I didn't really reference it, but after Annie was off life support, well, then suddenly only one parent can be there at a time. And so for about 2 weeks, Wells didn't see me or Courtney. And then after that, for 2 straight months, he only saw me or Courtney.
Yeah.
So it was just a trade-off period of time. And he knew it was because of Annie.
Yeah.
Didn't really understandably did not understand the gravity of the situation, but knew that the reason that one parent wasn't there at a time was because of his sister. And there could have been a lot of resentment, and I was worried about a lot of resentment after that, where, oh, you're the reason I didn't see Dad for 4 or 5 days, or you're the reason I didn't see Mom for 4 or 5 days, and didn't see an ounce of that. It was just, that's my sister, and I love her to death, and it's cool.
Man, that's so cool. I mean, it's hard to deny a higher power at work when you look at your family and the way that y'all were built to handle the situation you were dealt with, Annie, and not just handle it, but man, y'all are just perfectly equipped for it.
Thanks,
and that I remember that being the first thought that Beth and I had, when y'all told us about Annie and kind of what you were expecting. And again, this was not, hey, she's going to be on life support. Nobody saw that coming.
This was just Down syndrome at that point.
Yeah, Down syndrome, potential heart operation. It's like, okay, well, the first thing that always pops into my mind is like, well, there's no parents better for that situation. That the people that you and Courtney were always perfect for this. And
thank you.
It's so cool to watch that happen. And I know it's not easy. I mean, that's one of the things that I think has to be driven home is how difficult this still is, right? Like, you got let off the hook from life support only to say, all right, well, now you've got, permanently changed normal, right? Like now new normal, you've got to figure out, like you said, you come home now when the alarms go off, you better know what to do, and it's, in a sense, you went to this place and kind of never got to come back from it. But now that you're here and you're in it and you're living this life and seeing the life that blooms around it, and because of it, it's got to be hard but rewarding, right? I mean, does that fill your cup? Is it rewarding enough to fill your cup?
There's some people would think I'm crazy for saying, but we wouldn't change a thing.
Sure.
We wouldn't, if we could. It's like if it was like we were at Which and we were getting to select everything we want on the sandwich. There's nothing that we would change about the cards we've been dealt.
Yeah.
Because of how much we've learned from it, the relationships that have grown from it, our faith that has grown from it, and watching Wells just grow to that point, and our families, our extended families, everyone has learned so much from Annie. So we wouldn't change the heart surgery, the complications after. I wish we could take it from her, but she made it through. And then the Down syndrome side of things, we wouldn't change any of it because of how much better for it every one of us is.
Absolutely, man. I mean, you have grown so much through all of this, and like I said, it'd be one thing if I'm just some random podcaster, right. Sitting here interviewing you. And then we go back to when you had an afro on your head. And we're both playing basketball, in middle school, thinking that we had any business being on a basketball court.
Right. We're both like 5'5" at the time. Now we're 5'8" or 9", but hey,
still can't jump.
No,
but we go so far back, man, and it's just you never expect the things that life throws at you. I certainly never thought I'd be a girl dad the way that I am, but to watch the way that you've grown, it's just been so cool, man. And I can't wait to continue seeing, what happens next. What is Annie going to do, and the ride that you guys get to be on. So I know it's difficult, man, but I got to say, I just appreciate the inspiration that you guys have been and, the story that you have. And I hope everybody else gets to enjoy the story and take something from it. But, I mean, I want to give you an opportunity to do something here is speak to the people who might be in that situation now. What would you say?
Embrace it. So if somebody's getting a diagnosis of Down syndrome, or the cool thing about Courtney's advocacy is she's not just advocating for Down syndrome, she's advocating for heart moms and heart dads and like heart parents of kids who are going to need surgery, and pretty much kids with all disabilities. So we're living in a world where everything in people's minds has to be perfect and cookie cutter maybe, and we all have this perfect image of we're all wearing white linen on the beach and looking beautiful, and it has to just be the best picture ever.
Yeah.
I'm sure we have one of those up in our house somewhere. But
there's proof somewhere.
Yeah, there's somewhere. But I would say embrace the difficulty. One thing that my brother said whenever I called him to talk about Annie's diagnosis was, and to his credit, he's always been the tough love brother in a good way. But he basically said, well, this might be really, really good for you and Courtney and your faith because you've lived a very blessed life to this point. And in the moment, it was kind of hard to hear, but now I'm looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, he was right. My testimony before this was so vanilla and boring. I'm like, I
went to
grew up in church, grew up in it.
Had good parents.
Had great parents that like supported me, and then I went to college and moved away from it a little bit, and then
found
came
a
back.
beautiful woman.
Like it's the most cookie cutter vanilla testimony. And my brother was absolutely right. He was like, you've lived a very blessed, easy life. More or less words, easy.
Well, yeah, relatively speaking.
Relatively
right?
speaking,
and
absolutely.
You certainly had
I agree with it.
Yeah.
I completely from now looking back, I'm like, that was easy. So there's comfort in easy. There's a lot of the best word is comfort in my mind with easy, but comfort's not always the place that we need to be. I think that adversity is where we grow.
Yeah.
And Courtney and I have grown more in the last 2 years than we've grown up until that point in our lives. The previous 30, that was easy.
Yeah.
And so if somebody's getting a diagnosis of a disability, or they're getting a diagnosis of a heart surgery, or they have an older child that suddenly they start to notice and they go to a cardiologist and it turns out they need a heart surgery, embrace it and love them and know that you're going to come out better on the other side, regardless of what happens. And it's going to be very, very difficult, but the only thing you can do is embrace it. And if you do that, you're going to turn out better for it.
All right, man. Well, I think that's it.
We've done it.
I think we've done it. We've made it. I thank you so much for doing this, man, and sitting down with me and talking through the story. It's not an easy thing to talk through, right? It evokes a lot of emotions and makes you relive some things that maybe you didn't want to relive. But I'm almost certain somebody's going to hear this in a tough spot and hopefully be able to take that step forward because they've heard what y'all have gone through and how you did it and how you've gone on the other side. And there's growth in adversity. It's painful. It hurts. But there is life on the other side. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Yep. And I hope that's the case. I hope someone can take something from it. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much. And, all right, guys. Well, that's everything here from the Better by Nature podcast, brought to you by Life Leaf Remedies. Again, joined by Spencer Morey. Just an incredible story that he and his wife have gone through with their daughter Annie, and like we've said, it's still being written. So stay tuned. We'll probably have the Moreys back on with some hopefully great stories, right? Really, really fun stories that are less stressful.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, everybody, hope you enjoyed, and y'all feel better today.